We'll be presenting upon the components of aggregate expenditure. First, let's begin with defining aggregate expenditure. Aggregate expenditure, which is Y, is the same as GDP, income, and output. All these terms can be used interchangeably. The equation for aggregate expenditure is Y equals C, consumption, plus I, investment, plus G, government spending, plus NX, which is net exports. First, the component of aggregate expenditure we'll be looking at is consumption. Consumption is positively correlated with domestic income. As domestic income rises for consumers, so will their consumption levels. Likewise, wealth has a positive correlation with consumption. As the wealth of individuals increase, their likelihood to consume will also increase, rather than save. Interest rates, however, have a negative correlation with consumption. As interest rates rise, consumption will decrease. Higher interest rates influence saving, as high interest rates for certificates deposits, for example, increase people's want or desire to save. And high interest rates for loans, for example, decrease the amount of people willing to consume. Expected future income, although, has a positive correlation with consumption. People who expect their future income to be high are less likely to save now and more likely to spend. The next component of aggregate expenditure we'll be looking at is investment. Like consumption, investment has a negative correlation to interest rate. So, like I said earlier, as interest rates increase, so will the cost it takes for a person to take out a loan. Loans that have high interest rates result in higher interest payments, which decrease the amount people are willing to invest in physical capital. Expected profitability, however, has a positive correlation with investment. For instance, if physical capital that a company is looking into has a high likelihood that it will be profitable, people will be more likely to invest in that piece of capital. Business taxes, on the other hand, have a negative correlation with investment. Business taxes take away revenue that companies create through their product or service, decreasing the amount of money they have to invest in specific capital. So business taxes have a negative correlation with investment. Next, we have government spending. So government spending can increase or decrease total aggregate expenditure depending on what the government's perspective of what their citizens need. So U.S., for instance, has a different perspective of what their citizens need than what China thinks their citizens need. Government spending does not include transfer payments. Examples of transfer payments include benefits for unemployment and Social Security. Finally, we have net exports. Net exports have a positive correlation with foreign income. So, let's say the U.S. is sending exports to China. If the citizens of China have a higher income, they're more likely to purchase U.S.'s exports. So, foreign income and net exports have a positive correlation with each other. Exchange rates do not have a positive correlation. Their correlation with net exports is negative. So, if the price of the dollar or value of the dollar rises, the cost of exports from the U.S., for instance, will be higher for foreign countries if their currency is of less value. Next, we have tastes for foreign goods. If the U.S. taste for foreign goods is high, that would result in a higher amount of imports into the U.S. So, if the U.S. has high imports and not as high exports, that will result in a negative correlation with net exports, because net exports equals the amount of exports to a country minus the amount of imports into that country. Finally, we have trade policies. So trade policies' impact on net exports depends on the specific policy. So let's look at tariffs. Tariffs are taxes on imports. If the U.S. throws tariffs on China, for instance, China will likely, in response to these tariffs, throw tariffs back on the U.S. So imports or exports to China from the U.S. will either tax China's citizens to where they don't want to buy those exports, or tax the businesses in the U.S. that sent the exports to China, dissuading the people or businesses in the U.S. from sending those goods off. So those are the 4 components of aggregate expenditure. Thank you for your time.